bargain clothing. Most Westerners don't mention that compared to 10 years ago, there have been obvious changes made to my work.
Emergency exits, more meticulous checks on what's made it impossible for me to pay my workers, which caused me to...
Welcome to Lawun News. Today we'll be investigating whether sweatshops are good or bad for developing nations. Some say that sweatshops have the ability to lift many out of poverty, whilst others may argue that despite the steady wages, income is still very low and the working environment is dangerous. We brought in guests to provide further insights on the matter. First off, we have Mrs. Katoon, who has worked in sweatshops since she was 16.
I'm Mrs. Katoon and I'm currently 25 years old. I've been working in sweatshops for nearly 10 years now, and I can vouch that the working conditions in sweatshops are unsafe. However, it is still notable to mention that compared to 10 years ago, there have been obvious changes made to my work surroundings. Prior to the Rana Plaza incident, I was exposed to frequent factory fires, resulting in several injuries. Nowadays, most factories provide fire extinguishers, emergency exits, more meticulous checks on structural integrity, and activated safety measures. But these don't apply to all factories, and we still don't have any financial protection. We still have to work long hours, and we get little to no break time between shifts. We have to adapt to small workspaces which are often cramped due to the sheer number of people at these sweatshops. Nevertheless, the Rana Plaza incident really opened our eyes and helped us realize our rights. Slowly but surely, I hope that sweatshop workers will be able to work in safer environments.
Are there any other issues within the industry?
During the years I've worked in the industry, I've been subjected to constant sexual harassment and discrimination. We women are not given the rights or conditions we deserve. Even though the government guarantees a maternity leave of at least 100 days for the first 2 children, I did not get that proper break. And when I returned from my maternity leave, I got demoted, regardless of the rule that it is illegal for companies to demote women simply because of maternity leave. I'm aware that I won't get rich with this job since I send a great deal of my salary to my family, though I'm still very lucky that I could escape the fate that many of my friends suffered. They were all married off before they turned 16, and they had to move in with their husbands' families. They have no sense of freedom, and they even need permission from their mother-in-law to leave the house.
Did the COVID-19 pandemic affect you?
Sadly, it did. Lots of factories, including the one I worked in, had to shut down because of the low demand for clothes. If it weren't for my husband, who works in another garment factory, we'd be facing more financial strain. We have a hard time supporting ourselves now that I don't have a job. In addition to this, because of the new wave of COVID-19 and the spread of the Delta variant, the amount of illnesses and deaths has surged in Bangladesh. I fear that if someone in my family falls ill, we won't be able to access medication or vaccinations. I'm worried for my friend who has to report to work in a full-capacity factory where the virus can spread easily. The government categorized garment workers as essential workers to prevent damage to the economy. Therefore, garment workers were excluded from lockdown safety measures. I wish that the unions and the international labor advocates that have spoken up about the low conditions and the mistreatment of essential human rights would act upon this arising issue to help provide workers with adequate occupational safety and health protections or social programs that would allow workers, such as my friend, to work from home.
Here I am outside of a garment factory and with a fellow worker. How do you find the situation you're in?
I'm fed up being taken advantage of, but if I speak up, I may lose my job or get detained. These industries exploit our vulnerability because they know that we don't have any better options over working in a sweatshop. Even though it provides us with a stable income, the wages are so low I can barely afford to feed my family. I've miraculously managed to send my son off to school. Hopefully, he'll have better work opportunities, and slowly, the newer generations can help modernize our country further, creating a better future for the nation and its people.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Actor. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to begin by asking who you are and what kind of business you run.
Like most of us from Bangladesh, I work in the garment industry. I used to own and run a factory that sold clothes to Western retailers such as H&M, Zara, and Walmart.
It seems that the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly impacted the global fashion industry. Has this been reflected in your factory?
Well, because of the current pandemic, a lot of factories like mine have had to shut down. Many Western brands canceled orders from my factory due to decreased sales, a result of the pandemic. The low demand for clothes made it impossible for me to pay my workers, which caused me to lay off a large number of them. I could no longer hold onto my business and sadly had to shut down my factory. The losses that I had to deal with weren't only affecting my factory but many others as well. Looking long term, I believe that the country's economy and citizens will be deeply affected.
Are you aware of the influence people like you have on the rest of the country?
Yes, Bangladesh's factory companies are well aware of our leadership positions and are therefore constantly trying to modernize in order to stay at the top. We concern ourselves with costs and take interest in new technologies that differentiate us from traditional producers. We aim to utilize different work procedures and machinery to enhance productivity and to reduce energy consumption and environmental issues. In order to have a sustainable factory, we need to invest in machines that are energy and power efficient and at the same time flexible in terms of product variety, so that we are always ready for any market changes.
Great. Thank you so much for today. Now moving on to Mr. Clay, you're our expert for this particular news segment. Would you be able to give us some facts and statistics and more thorough information regarding sweatshops?
I most certainly can. Bangladesh GDP has soared since 1980s, and the amount of people living in poverty has fallen from over 45% to less than 13%. Additionally, the country's economy is 15 times larger now than it was in 1980s. Wherever new export industries grow, measurable improvements can be observed in the lives of ordinary people. Partially because the growing industry must offer a relatively high wage than workers might get elsewhere in order to grow their workforce. This prompts factories to compete with each other for workers and employees, resulting in a rise in rural wages and a decrease in unemployment cases. The garment industry is the country's main export earner and accounts for about 80% of the country's exports. It employs about 5 million people and generated an income of 18 billion USD in 2010. Yet the pay is low, making it barely possible for the garment industry workers to support themselves and their families. Rana Plaza became synonymous with textile workers' atrocious working conditions that are easily overlooked by Western consumers who hunt bargain clothing. Most Westerners don't like the idea of workers in third world countries being paid an insufficient amount for them to buy cheap fashion items. This would have been deemed unacceptable in most first world countries, but there is no other realistic alternative for industrialization in Bangladesh. To pose it means that you're willing to deny desperately poor people a chance of progression. Furthermore, the development of countries moves unevenly. What's seen as appropriate for one country at one stage may not be appropriate for another country at another stage. That's why it's ineffective to compare Bangladesh standards with American standards. The working conditions may be dangerous and they may not have any financial protection, but it's a lot better than toiling their lives away in the fields. By contrast, working in a clothing factory looks to be a much more attractive option. The textile industry lifted millions out of poverty. 1980 workers lived in shacks and toiled in factories with no toilets or safe drinking water. Many workers were malnourished and slept on the floor. They couldn't save anything for their past working years. However, there's small indications that the quality of life is improving. While the minimum wage doubled, it's still only half of what the unions have suggested and far from living wage. The overall cost of living for garment workers has increased by 86% between 2013 and 2018. However, the influential Manufacturers Association BGMEA will close factories if the minimum wage is increased further. As you should know by now, nothing truly is black or white. But with the information I've shared today, I can conclude that the garment industry is leading to a better Bangladesh. It will help modernize and industrialize this country. Even if these industries exploit human rights in the sense that you don't have an alternative that can get
get them by and are therefore in one way or another put into the garment industry, which makes it possible for these companies to offer lower wages. However, as seen in these statistics, the living wage is increasing and leading to an increase of life expectancy. The country's economy has risen, which means that there's been measurable improvements for the civilians and workers. For example, the industry creates opportunities for sub-companies to grow. The more garment workers, the more business for these industries. Furthermore, because of the growing industry, different factories will start to compete with each other for the workers and will have to offer a relatively higher wage than workers might get elsewhere. They will also improve the safety standards to become more attractive for the workers and therefore creating a better living standard and living wage for the people of Bangladesh. And that's all for Lara News. Thank you for watching. See you on Monday.